Welcome back to Cast a Commotion, Deckheads. This is the podcast where we're going to be talking about Flesh and Blood and all things surrounding it. This one's going to be a little bit late to the party. This is talking about Bright Lights. This is going to be the Back to Basics series, and I wanted to try to catch up on this, mostly because we're starting to see a lot of hype around one of the heroes, Dio, showing up across a lot of top events. And even going undefeated almost in the last calling. I think that was Auckland. Never mind, that's Melbourne. And well, what else can we really say that's not going to be super in Bright Lights? It was a completely different situation. Mechanologists rule the landscape because that's all you're going to get in this set. There's no other classes, no other there is a talent, the hidden shadow talent for the mechanologist. For the first time we got to see that, but all that and more this time on Cast a Commotion. Bright Lights. So as you may or may not be seeing, I'm going to start to accompany this with a video formatted podcast that will come out much later past the audio recording. That is because I'm very new at editing, not only just audio, but also video. So as hard as it already was to edit a podcast every couple of weeks, I'm going to start adding video onto that. And that just means that the podcast version, the audio, will be first and foremost on the Patreon, YouTube, but anything else, it will be out first, and then I will try to get a video accompaniment out to it. If you need to see any examples on screen that I'm going to try to be throwing forward. I tried doing it with the previous podcasts, but it may not have been readily apparent because, well, they were just thumbnails with just my stupid little art on it. Onward to Bright Lights, the Back to Basics series. So, couple things in Bright Lights that are brand new are the packs are meant to rip and play by I think it's opening 3 packs and then just throwing it together, and you can just jam out games with that. And that is because it is a full mechanologist set. It's meant to get new players into the game, and we saw that at our pre-release for Bright Lights, and I think it was September. We saw that 3 or 4 new players we had never seen before. They had close to no idea how to play the game, just showed up because Bright Lights was, I think, the correct set to do this with. Mechanologist is riding that cyberpunk hype wave that's been around for a few years now. So with that, these packs are meant to rip and play. The draft experience is amazing. I've been through a couple months of it now. I haven't had a better draft experience across any card game. As long as you know what you're looking for and you actually look into the mechanics, which I'm going to help you do into this episode, you should have a good time in this and Sealed. Not a lot of time left, though. Like I said, I'm kind of late to the party here, so I'm going to give you this video around the mid-cycle of Bright Lights. And we're going to be looking into heavy hitters next. I'm going to try to stay on top of that cycle now that I'm going to be trying to do video and audio. So I'm going to be trying to get onto that YouTube cycle, I guess. Other than that rip and play factor that is going into Bright Lights, the expansion slot is something that I have really mixed feelings about. It was cool that the expansion slot was there so that you got some kind of incentive to buy and play, and you could feel good about some of the packs we're opening during Draft and Sealed because your hero might get some support. They printed the worst example of an overpowered card I've seen in a bit in this set, and it's in the expansion slot. As my local meta and I have talked about, my MLM, it's crazy that the class that benefited the most from the mechanologist set was not a mechanologist. We'll get more into that later. Beyond that, we have the Marvel controversy. I will pull examples up for the video here. for you to see that the Marvels aren't quite like the Marvels we saw in either Uprising or Dynasty. And Outsiders, right? Those had fantastic Marvels. These are confusingly bland, but we'll get around to it. And what else? Returning cards to Evo kind of shocked the system a little bit. Were Fyendal Spring Tunic, Hyperdriver, Maximum Velocity, some staples you would expect to see. Come back for the Mechanologist set. Overloop, Teklo Foundry Heart, Dash Specializations. Other than that, you had not a lot else, just the Quicken token, I guess. A lot of new cards in that expansion slot that will help quite a bit. Ooh, that sounded a lot different. I'm going to go ahead and do the more forward speaking past it, because I think I have my plosives under control, but let me know how it sounds. I did set up a different sound setting on this. I took away some compression, took away some limiting, and went for a more raw approach because my mic technique, I feel like, has been getting better. So let me know how it sounds if you can. If you're getting this on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're getting it from, just make sure to let me know. New keywords were introduced in this set. Crank is one of them. It's a keyword that often appears on items. And it says, when this enters the arena, you can remove a Steam counter from this item. When you do, gain an action point. It's a static word. It's just always around. It's on the card at all times, even after it enters the arena. It can be used as an identifier for certain cards, like Max Nitro likes to see things with Crank. You can only gain action points during your phase. This is important to say because Dash can play items as instants off the top of her deck, as we'll go over later. So Crank is going to be probably the most important keyword, I feel like, off of this set. Yeah, Scrap is cool. The other mechanics are cool, but Crank really opens up action point possibilities and shenanigans for any hero or mechanologist who chooses to use it. The next one is Modular. That one is another static word that says this may be equipped to any zone. So head, chest, arms, legs. You can equip in a modular piece of equipment anywhere. What is weird about that? Modular doesn't allow you to equip any other hero equipment zones, right? So you can't like equip to your opponent's stuff to kind of take away something from them. That's important to note. You can't use it for offhand areas. Like you can't use it in the quiver spot, offhand, anything else. It's just your equipment, because these are not considered equipment zones. Those are weapon zones. What else? Oh, Scrap, a word that I brought up earlier, right? That's an additional cost. You can banish an item or an equipment from your graveyard, right? That's how you scrap. Again, it's a static keyword. It's always on the card. The card that's banished to pay for the scrap is considered to have been scrapped. I don't remember if there's a lot of cards that specifically care about that, but that's just something to note. And I'm sure it'll probably also come into play as well in the future. Scrap is optional. You have to declare when you play the card if you're going to pay the scrap cost, since all costs are paid at the same time. Example given, a card costs 3 and also has scrap. You must announce you're going to play the card with the scrap cost. You then pay all costs at once. You get rid of the card from the graveyard and you pitch from your hand. You can't pay scrap if you don't have a card to banish, right? If you can't pay the cost, you can't pay the cost. Seems obvious, but whatever. Then you have the next mechanic is Evo Upgrade, right? It's like a label. It's not a static ability or anything. Evo Upgrade isn't referenced in many other ways. It's just something that you can do. It's really just a label. That's all it does. It counts to see how many other Evos you have. It's just a label for you to read and to reference for other cards. It really isn't much else. Then you have Galvanize, which is when an item... No. When this defends, you can destroy an item that's in play. Sorry. There's actually a bit more to Bright Lights than I thought there was going to be. You may destroy an item you control if you do X, right? Right now, Galvanize is used mostly for plus defense on cards. So it'll be like Galvanize, give this +2 defense. So it would go, your opponent's attacks. You defend with a card that has Galvanize. When the card becomes defending, you can choose to Galvanize. And that is destroying an item you control. When you do, get the effect of, for example, +2 defense, right? There's also a new type of card. I'm not the biggest fan of adding types. It'll start to become confusing if we do this too often. But here we are, adding a new type of card. It's called a block card. It's a type of card, much like attack action, non-attack action, attack reaction, all that, right? It's a block card. Can't be played. It can only be used to block. Thus, it can't be used from your arsenal unless it has a specific keyword. Introduced in the Tolarian Community College set called Round the Table, we learned of a card that has something called Ambush. It means it can be blocked with from arsenal. No other cards do that right now, though. It's just in those specific Blitz decks that came in the Round the Table set. Again, that could change in the future. Obviously, they've already made the keyword. Why wouldn't they continue to use it? Block cards are not defense reactions. Keep that in mind. They are not defense reactions. They are their own card. They are their own card. I think that's going to be it for new mechanics introduced. Those are all the new keywords, right? We've already gone over tokens. We've gone over that the tunic is back in the expansion slot. I didn't really go over what the expansion slot really was. Or maybe I did. It is just other classes getting cards in this set in a meaningful way, right? Yeah, that's all the expansion slot really is. For draft purposes, you can't use those cards in the draft. You basically pull them out of the pack. They're yours to keep, but you can't use them in that existing draft or sealed format. With all of these abilities, you can kind of tell there's a huge importance on playing and manipulating items and Steam counters on all of those items and finding those synergies, right? It's really added a lot of depth to the Mechanologist gameplay loop, which there already was a lot of depth. I have had 2 players in my local meta sit there and say, God damn it, my brain hurts. Or they would just keep tripping up over themselves. So Mechanologist has gotten even more complicated than it was before, which is both a good and a bad thing. Good in that once you learn how to use all of these new Mechanologist abilities in existence, with cards in existence already, you can create quite devastating turns, as we saw in the Calling. Auckland, I do think it was Auckland. I hope that's correct. Let me go ahead and check that for you.
A few moments later.
Melbourne. Okay. Not Auckland. This was the Calling Melbourne that -IO almost went completely undefeated in, which is just insane to say. I think first day was 7-0, and then obviously up until the finals, undefeated. That's insane. So once you really learn how to manipulate a lot of the items in this set, Steam counters in this set, abilities, and really learn the gameplay loop for Mechanologist now, the abuse of items and action points becomes quite horrid. That was really high-level play. Don't take anything from the player. I want to say his name was Thomas. Don't remember the last name off the top of my head. Amazing player. Watching that player navigate that deck, boosting only when necessary to dig for items, specifically to trigger action points and get the benefit of the item. It's just insane to watch that dash play. But yeah, that's just to drive the point home that the skill floor has been raised and the skill ceiling has been dropped. They tighten up pretty quick once you learn that gameplay loop. So not super complicated, but there's depth is how I would rate all the new mechanics. Speaking of dash, we can go over dash IO. Standard hero with 4 intellect. Not so standard in the fact that she starts with 36 health, 18 for the young hero. That hero says you may look at the top of your deck at any time. Pretty complicated ability from a rule standpoint. But realistically, it means you can just sit there and really just look at that deck, right? It's a static ability, right? It affects game rules. It allows you to look through standard private information as if, how do I describe that? You can't change the order of anything on top unless otherwise stated with certain cards, and you can't interrupt abilities in order to look at the top. Like you can't have opt 3 and then opt 1, look at the top, opt 2, look at, like, there's no reason to do that anyway, but the point is you can't look at the 4th card, right? So while opt is resolving, you don't go opt 1 card, 2 card, 3 card, and while opt is happening, look at the 4th card. You can't do that. It is opt 3 or whatever, opt 1 or whatever, resolve the opt, put that card on the top or the bottom, and then you may look at the top card after that. Right, you can't, with Twin Drive, for example, you can't boost one card, look at the top, and then boost the other. Those are costs, and they all have to be paid at the same time. So, if you have priority, you can look at the top of your deck. The second part of her ability is you can play the top card of your deck if it's an item by paying 1 more resource. If it costs 0 or 1. Yes. So if there's an item on top of your deck and it costs 0 to 1, you can play it as though it were an instant and pay 1 more resource. God, she does a lot. Obviously, the utility in that is you get instant speed items that have crank, and you can get an action point off of that. Playing actions as this instant still counts as playing the action. It's just they don't take an action point. They're an instant. The utility in that is as I just said with the gameplay loop discussion I just had a second ago. You can look at the top of your deck and go, all right, so with what I have in my hand, I can boost once, get rid of that card that I don't like, look at the top, choose to play that and maybe get my action point back from crank or something, and then continue this ridiculous chain with the floating resources, look at the top again, use my Tekla Foundry Heart to get rid of a few more cards. Like it's just so much you have to do, but once you get it going, you will find the most optimal turn for yourself every single time. And with those extra action points, you can start to then abuse Dash's new specialization, a pistol. No, it's a gun. It's a 2-handed gun somehow if you look at the art. It's the Symbiosis Shot. It attacks for 2. Doesn't come into play with any steam counters, and it says when an item comes into play, if this has less than 16 counters on it, you may put a steam counter on this. Remove a steam counter to attack, right? So on a good high octane turn where you're manipulating the top of your deck, putting in cards with cranking, getting your action points back, boosting, getting a bunch of go again, and then stacking action points. If this thing has 5 counters on it and you've got 5 spare action points, that's 5 free shots of just 2. It's pretty gross. So Symbiosis Shot is not to be underestimated. You do need certain items to guarantee a fatigue loop with this. That's pretty advanced play, and I might go over that if I go over some kind of a DO list in the future. But that's just me letting you know it exists so you can look into it with further content or discussions in the Discord should you choose to join our Discord at Crash Command Games. Fairly healthy Flesh and Blood environment. Some higher end players, some aspiring pros, and some casual players all around. Lots of ideas to be floated. Make sure to join that if you can. Now that the shameless plug for the Discord is over, we can just move on to the next hero. Because when Back to Basics, we just basically go over the mechanics, heroes, and a few key cards. So next up is the hero that I won from ProQuest 4. 4? Max the Hype Nitro. I am really not a fan of the name the Hype Nitro. Here it is. Let's see if I can get it to focus on this guy. No, I don't think it's gonna focus. It's kind of focused on my one plane right here to do all the fancy effects right there. But what Max says at a 4 intellect, 40 health hero status is once per turn, you can pay 2 resources to create a hyperdriver token with 2 steam counters. Okay. You can only activate that ability if you've boosted. So there's a lot going on right there, right? 2 resources, once per turn action, create a hyperdriver token with 2 steam counters, only if you boost. So kind of sounds like a chain ender, right? Aside from his second ability, which says hyperdrivers you control gain crank. So his tokens that he creates gain crank. He can get action points off of that, because if you notice that in that ability, it didn't say go again. So that's how you're going to be able to continue chains, get extra resources off the boost from that hyperdriver that you just create. If you're running any other hyperdrivers in your deck, they also gain crank, so they become a source of gaining more action points and more resources. And with that in mind, you can tell he is meant to generate insane amounts of resources and utility through weird combat weaving. You're weaving in and out of combat. You're weaving through the streets of metrics on his, I don't even know what they call those bikes, but it's insane. They run off of, what is it called? What is that stupid power source called? Teklokinetic something. It's some kind of fusion reaction. Either way, the point is, yeah, he weaves in and out of the streets, hit and run kind of thing. Tap, run off, generate speed, tap, and then maybe finish with a big old attack, right? Because he generates those resources as he gives you those little taps and then comes in for the giant payload, for example. Hyperdrivers you create with this ability are almost ephemeral. Almost. They can be put under the evos and items that ask for it, and the counter stays under there. But if the counter ever hits your graveyard, it just goes away. It doesn't exist any further. You're considered to have boosted if you pay the boost cost of any card like 0 to 60, 0 to 50, anything that says boost. If you peel the top card of your deck off and banish it to give yourself go again, you've boosted. You can crank hyperdrivers that enter the arena at any point in time, anywhere, anyway. Can be kind of ridiculous to think about because of things like Blessing of Ingenuity. The reason we go over these small little details is so you can start thinking about cards you've seen in the past, or maybe look into anything that would help you in any way, shape, or form. I encourage deck building quite a bit. Specifically with this game, right? Net decking had a lot of uses in certain other games where they were fairly solvable. But the more you play this game, the more you'll understand. Sometimes deck building yourself for your style in your hero with cards you like, and then you learn the matchups with your cards and your style, can sometimes push you further than just looking at the top deck. Really, this game is built around practice. It really is amazing. I'm just going to be done sucking it for now. We'll move on to Max's weapon, Banksy. This is how you give your opponent their bank statement, right there. Once per turn action, you pay a resource, attack. It attacks for 3. You may only attack with this if you've cranked. So then we look at Max and go, well, now we know why hyperdrivers have crank. Now we know why his passive ability can crank. It's so you can pump out another attack and possibly threaten putting another hyperdriver in play with more steam counters, or maybe you have another item with steam, like a boom grenade or something. Getting hit with Banksy sucks for multiple reasons. So it's kind of like a forced block. But bad in the end of the game, because if you can't crank and you can't boost and you can't do anything, somehow your wrench becomes useless. That's a design fault, I personally think. I don't think at any point in time should a wrench... That is a 3-foot wrench he's holding. Minimum. 3 to 4 foot wrench. That's what's going over his shoulders. All right. I'll put a better picture here. Okay. Right here. Massive fucking wrench. I don't think that should be reliant on you gaining speed or whatever. It's a weird restriction to put on the weapon. I'd have preferred an attack for 2 and didn't have that part with Crank, but here we are in the real world with Flesh and Blood saying he needs to crank to use this. You're only considered to have cranked if you've used the triggered ability Crank. I shouldn't have to say this, but for items like Induction Chamber and what is that? Plasma Purifier, wrenches are not guns and wrenches are not pistols. So that should not have to be said, but there it is. The third hero is the one that I find the most interesting storyline wise. Well, no, I like Street Kids. It's the first class that I played in Cyberpunk. I love Street Kids. So not entirely true, but Teklo does have my interest because in his story, he's the one who challenged the steam giant of Metrix. He came across this new source of energy. What is it called? Teklokinetic. Something. I wish it had been a while. I read it back in September, but it's later on by at least 2 months. 2 months since I read the story. And it's kind of implied he starts dealing with the shadows to gain knowledge of this power or access to this power. Because he grants this whole city a whole new innovation of energy, and it can power hundreds of homes per unit of this power source creation. He then creates all these constructs, dolls, and many other little robots to follow him around and make sure his legacy continues and maintains the grounds that all of the weird I'm going to call it shadow energy. I don't even care. Like that stuff is shadow energy for sure. Only evident by the fact that when he arises 50 years later from an explosion, somehow perfectly intact, when it was reported that he was killed, well, here he is. And in that story, he starts getting all the surgery done. And then we have cards revealed like the Mechropotent, where he's a shadow mechanologist, right? So this character is very interesting to me. Teklavison, the esteemed magnate, and Teklavison, the young hero. Kind of went into a bit of a story thing there. I might do that more independently, but for now we're focused on the cards and their effects. So that's 4 intellect, 40 health, 4 and 20 for the young hero. Mechanologist is not shadow quite yet. You have to transform into the shadow being. You may play Evos from your banished zone. Right? So remember earlier when I said that there are Evos that just kind of have that label on them? This is why. Among other things, right? Things that look for the word Evo and Evo upgrades. That's just a thing. So Teklavison can play Evos from the banished zone. And then his ability is you pay 3 resources. You may play Evos, your next Evo You may play your next Evo as though it were an instant. When you do, draw a card. That's way more complicated than it needed to be. You only draw the card if the next Evo you play is a result of this effect. Once you play this Evo as an instant using this effect, the next one obviously isn't affected by this because the trigger has been consumed. Action cards played as an instant do not cost action points. We've already gone over that with some of the items in Crank with Dash, all that kind of stuff. If you've transformed into Teklavison, the Mechropotent, the Shadow Mechanologist version, you lose these abilities. You are now Teklavison the Mechropotent. Okay? So his abilities aren't really that complicated. You can play your Evos as they were an instant. And you can play them from the banish zone. That's really all there is to him. He likes scrap and he likes banishing cards faster because then he can dig for the perfect equipment a lot faster. A lot more of a defensive hero, a lot more fatiguey. I think this one is going to be the better of the heroes once he's solved. But for now, let's talk about Tech Leveson and his weapon, the Tekla Leveler. I fucking hate that this is in the game. I'm sure I've done it in the past, but I really talk shit about the aesthetics of this game. And man, this thing is the BFG from Doom with 3 chain guns strapped to it. How am I supposed to sit here and believe that any hero could fight this? Moving along, it has 2 power. If you have 1 or more Evos equipped, it has once per turn action attack for 3 resources. That's awful. That's just not good. But if you have 2 or more Evos, it costs 2 less resources to activate. If you have 3 or more Evos, it gets go again. And if you have 4 Evos, it gets +1 power. So later in the game, after you've been boosting, banishing Evos, equipping them to yourself at instant speed, developing your board, eventually it becomes 1 resource for 3 attack with go again on a gun. Okay, so that's pretty good. You have an invocation-like card called Construct. No, it's called Singularity. It costs 6 resources. I have to look at it. So 1 second.
A few moments later.
It's 6 resources, 3 defense, and it is a legendary Tech Leveson specialization. It says transform your hero, your weapon, and 4 Evos you have equipped into Tech Leveson the Necropotent. It enters the arena with health equal to the hero it transformed from. This card has, for 3 resources, banish 2 cards from your soul, attack. Whenever this attacks a hero, they discard a card. Your Mechanologist attacks, get go again. This counts as having 4 Evos equipped. Battle Worn. So this thing has 6 power, 6 defense, 3 intellect. You lose an intellect, but you gain 6 power, 6 defense attack on top of your weapons. You must be able to, just like the Nitro Mechanoid, you must be able to transform all of the pieces listed. The 4 Evos, God, what is it? The 4 Evos, the weapon, and your hero. You have to have all of those things in order to transform into the Necropotent. If one of those gets destroyed for any reason, before this card resolves, the Singularity, you will lose this card and your ability to turn into the Necropotent. It's considered a single object. It's not like multiple zones of equipment and a weapon. It's just your hero, right? Effects that put a -1 defense counter on an equipment may target and put counters on Tech Leveson. If it defends an attack with Phantasm, the Phantasm doesn't trigger because Tech Leveson the Necropotent is not an attack action card. That is super relevant right now since Jemai is the queen of the castle. So just blocking with the Necropotent does not cause Phantasm to trigger, since Phantasm does specify a non-illusionist attack action card. Okay. Those are the 3 heroes. Those are their abilities. And there's 1 little extra card, the Singularity, to kind of give you an idea of what's going on in Bright Lights. So with Dash.io, you have kind of a speedy item build and action point manipulation deck. In Max Nitro, the hype, you have the ability to create a lot of resources across a small few jabs with a big finish, right? So he's more about knowing how to weave your boosts, weave your abilities, and really... You're not going to be looking for long combat chains with that one. You're just going to be looking for the jabs and the finish, right? So make sure to get that. And then Tech Leveson is the long game. Play defensively, jab here and there with your gun if you can, but all the while you're digging and waiting for the surgery to complete so you can become the perfect Singularity, right? Whatever the hell he calls himself. I want to go over a few cards. but only because they're insane. The episode is kind of already running into a time cap that I like to try to maintain. So we're just going to talk about what I hated about this set, right? A lot of the cards are pretty standard Mechanologist cards. They cost 1, they cost 0, they boost, they attack for breakpoints, they have 3, right? If you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time and you've listened to any Back to the Basics, you're not seeing a whole lot new here, just a lot of boost. A couple on hits that say like put items into play, put steam counters on things, right? The typical Mechanologist affair. Twin Drive is kind of a unique one. It boosts twice. That helps you get to maximum velocity a little bit faster. So that's a card to look out for, though I do think it just blew up in price. So, Already Dead for Assassins, even for Arachne, really boosts your game. It gives you a 6 attack popper that has a really relevant text. And I've done this to people already. So it says, you're contracted to banish opponents' non-action cards. When you complete this, create a silver. When this hits a hero, banish the top card of their deck and a defending card. You can banish equipment with this. It's disgusting. Azuri takes a huge toll on opponents who choose to block with their armor, and this gets over. That's kind of it. Already Dead is insane. You have, I believe, one of the cooler defense reactions for Ninja, Wax Off to pair with Wax On. If you've played Wax On this turn, create a Zen State token. In the mirror or even against Mechanologist, this is disgusting because Zen State tokens reduce all damage you take by 1 for 2 turns. Huge swing over. It also shuts down the opposing Crouching Tiger plan. For my personal love of Riptide, Intoxicating Shot is a blue specialization for Riptide that costs 0 and hits for 4, defense for 3. It is the perfect card to go into my Riptide philosophy of just block out a bunch, return a 0-cost arrow with a breakpoint, and possibly an on-hit. The on-hit for this one is incredible. Right? When this hits a hero, you create a Courage and a Quicken token. That means if your opponent attacks with anything, they'll be getting +1 and go again. And if you know anything about Riptide, you know that turns on every single trap. You also have... Oh, the broken card. Here we go. Tome of Imperial Flame. If you are playing Dromai and you're not playing this, you're doing it wrong. This is better than Art of War. It flat out. If you're a Draconic hero, this is better than Art of War. I'm trying to spend a lot of time building other decks, but I'm going to go back to Fi and try to build Royal Fi because of this card. It's a Draconic action that costs 0. It is a red card, so automatically it turns on all your cards that say they need a red card played before this. It says, draw a card. If you're royal, draw 2 cards. You may pitch 2 red cards. If you don't, banish your hand. So, you play this card from Arsenal. You go to 4 from your 4-card hand to a 6-card hand. You then filter out the cards you don't want to play this turn, or maybe to save later for the game. You put 2 red cards in your pitch zone, you have 2 resources floating. You now have 2 resources floating. Most likely you have a Flame Scale Furnace, which means you actually have 3 resources floating. Okay? So you go 2 resources, activate the Flame Scale. You have 3 red cards in your, or 2 red cards in your pitch minimum. 3 resources with a 4-card hand. You've already played a red card. All of your Draconic cards that care about playing a red card are turned on. It's insane. It's insane that you can just do this at any point in time. There's no priority between drawing and pitching, so there's no time in between. It's they all have to resolve before you can do anything else. There's nothing more that can be said about this. It's just a disgusting card. In Dromai, it basically says you're almost guaranteed to get Tumultide as soon as she gets it. And then the meme of the day, Slay, a shadow instant that says destroy target angel ally. Prism wasn't already doing that hot. I don't know why they hated on her a little bit more. That's really it for Bright Lights. Those mechanics, those heroes, all of that. come together to bring in an amazing draft experience, an amazing sealed experience. There really isn't a lot I have bad to say about the set, except for the Tome of Imperial Flame. Because of that card, Dromai will be the next living legend. Period. That unless Heavy Hitters comes out and just ruins her day with tons of poppers, which it probably will, Guardian and Brood are in the set, and some way to give Warrior a way to get around New Prism. I don't know. But I do want to say, man, Riptide loves Mechanologist and Warrior. So you can shit on him all you want. I had a few comments come back to me about why did I make a Riptide podcast episode. Give it a minute. Give it a minute. Guarantee I'll probably be playing him into the next Road to Nationals. That's going to be it for this Back to Basics episode. I just kind of want to get you introduced into the concept of bright lights. I'm going to end this pretty simply. If you're listening or seeing this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like. Tell me what you thought about the audio quality. Is there anything that you think I could do? Is there anything wrong with the video quality? I tried to make the video as good as I could with what I had. I bought a few items. I've always been trying to make my audio better because I think that's so much more important. Every time I put cards for sale for Flesh and Blood on anything, they sell it pretty quick, but I only put up like 1 or 2 playsets at a time. So just keep an eye out for that. If you're looking for anything specific, check me out on Crash Command Games on TCG Player. Again, I need to start utilizing eBay more, but that's a lot more time consuming than TCG Player. I have 1 more box of Outsiders to sort, and then the Flesh and Blood stuff will start to go up a lot faster and en masse. Go ahead and check this podcast out in audio form anywhere. Be on the lookout for the video form of this. I'm going to try my best to make that a well-edited piece, but that's going to come out a week or 2 after the audio form. So feel rewarded in listening to the audio version of this. It will be much faster. You'll get that content way before any videos ever come out. I am going to be making accompanying videos to the podcast now that I have video equipment, lighting, and all that stuff. I am going to try to make it like expanded ideas off of what I've talked about in these podcasts that are just going to ultimately lead right back into the podcast. Yeah, that's it. Go ahead and make sure to check out the Patreon. I'm going to start linking that everywhere that I possibly can. Any little bit helps. The more that we get there, the better and better this content's going to get. The more motivated I'm going to be to get there. Realistically, hopefully I can just help everybody get into this game because it has taken over the competitive space. I can see new faces at every other event. I keep inviting more and more people to it, and I hope you do the same. Remember not to be super pushy about it, though. People get tribalistic too quickly. That's going to be it for this episode of Cast of Commotion, everybody. Thanks for listening. This one is zeroed.